better places for them to invest their giving dollars. Which brings up the issue of where did Cain get his wife? That's the last one I'll discuss before opening up for questions. And that's the 8th most frequent objection we hear about the Christian faith. Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel and Seth. And if Cain murdered Abel, where did he get his wife from? Actually, they're only getting part of the difficulty. Genesis chapter 4 tells us that not only did Cain marry a woman as his wife, he populated a whole city. He built a city and he populated that city. So the issue is, where did he get all the people to populate a city, as well as where did he get his wife? Well, if you read the 5th chapter of Genesis, it tells us that Adam and Eve had Cain, Abel, and Seth, and many sons and daughters besides. Well, you can work it out. You're going to be living 900 years, and the patriarchs before the flood lived an average of 912 years apiece. And incidentally, that's not merely a biblical claim. The Sumerian and Akkadian records also record that their most ancient line of kings lived typically 1,000 years apiece. So it's not just the Bible that's making that claim, and if you want, I'll give you a possible scientific explanation for how that could work out, why lifespans are shorter today than they were in the past. It has to do with the Vela supernova. So if you want the research paper on it, I got it right here. But let me just jump right to the point. If you've got people living 900 years, you can expect them to give birth to a fair number of children, even with the best available birth control methods they would have at that time. I mean, Adam and Eve didn't have thermometers, so using the rhythm method, I think we can conservatively estimate that they're having at least one child every 5 years, and that they'd be reproductive for at least 600 years. That means 120 children per couple. If you're having 120 children coming from every couple, then how many years would Cain have to wait before he had 1,000 women to choose from as his wife? Well, the answer is you only have to wait a couple hundred years. Actually, you discover the problem of the flood here. If people are giving birth at that rate, we would expect that God's command to Adam to fill the earth should have been fulfilled in Adam's lifespan. By the time he's 900 years old, you would expect 6 billion people to be living on the face of the earth. The archaeological evidence that tells us at best there were maybe 1 or 2 million, perhaps only hundreds of thousands of people living on the face of the earth at that time. What's the explanation? Genesis chapter 4. Cain's example of murdering his brother became commonplace throughout that time. In fact, you can do a little calculation based on that birth rate, that minimum birth rate. At least 19 out of 20 people were dying a death of murder. So it gives us some kind of context for why God used that means of judgment to deal with the reprobation of humanity at that time. Which brings up one final issue. Why is the God of the Old Testament so cruel and the God of the New Testament so loving? Jesus told us that through his death on the cross and his resurrection from the dead would come the baptism in the Holy Spirit. That there would be human beings as a result of that event that would be permanently endowed with God's Holy Spirit. As a result, they would act as a salt of the earth, and this would be a preventive from certain segments of humanity demonstrating the degree of reprobation we see throughout the Old Testament. A good example, God sent 2 angels to visit Sodom and Gomorrah. What those angels discovered is that every single male in that city was wanting to engage in homosexual rape. There wasn't an exception. The only exception was Lot. All the rest of them were eager to engage in that kind of activity. And therefore the cities were destroyed. Why? To protect the rest of humanity. Because one thing Romans 1 points out is that degree of evil becomes contagious. It's a disease, it's a malignancy. And just like a surgeon would remove a cancer from your body in order to keep the rest of the body alive, likewise, in the Old Testament, he surgically removed these reprobate societies to protect the rest of humanity. That doesn't take place today. Because yes, you have homosexual rapers running around today, but you don't find whole cities where everybody inside that city is partaking in that kind of activity. There's a restraint which prevents that from happening because of what Jesus did on the cross, which was not taking place in the Old Testament period. With that, I'll throw it open for any questions and comments you might have about these issues or any other issues that you might have. And maybe before I do that, I'll take your question. If you think of something after you leave here, and that always happens. That always happens to me when I hear a lecture. 3 hours later, I think of a great question I wished I had asked. Well, we have a daily hotline, and you can contact us, and we'll be happy to deal with your questions anytime they come up. So that phone number is available. And also, if you're interested in writing us, we'd be happy to respond to your questions in writing. But let me just take your question. Go ahead.
I heard not too long ago one skeptical response where in the Old Testament God causes one of the prophets to cause the sun to stand still. How do you address that?
Joshua's long day. Okay, again, it's Hebrew, and because of the paucity of Hebrew nouns, we don't know whether the text is claiming an extra period of darkness or an extra period of light. And scholars are debated 50-50 on that issue, that it's either a long day or a long night. It really depends on your military interpretations. Does Joshua need coolness, or does he need light to see in order to complete his battle? So it could go either way. But that particular event takes place in a very small valley. That's a valley in Israel where you've got hills and mountains all the way around. It's a bowl. Therefore, it's possible that event was achieved simply through an atmospheric phenomenon. For example, we could imagine some weather event which would impose a long period of darkness upon that valley in spite of the light of the sun. Or we could imagine some kind of reflective or refractive phenomena going in the atmosphere which brings in extra light. So it could be solved in that manner. Another way you can solve it is to say, well, God performed a miracle. It takes place beyond the laws of physics, beyond matter, energy, length, width, height, and time. And since we have the physics today to demonstrate that God indeed has those kinds of capacities, that would be a possible solution to the problem. Not a possible solution is that God stopped the earth in its rotation. If he did that, there would have been no survivors. Everybody would have been killed on planet Earth. Would have wreaked some destruction in the solar system beyond the earth. So God didn't do that. Neither did he move the sun out of its place. If he did that, again, there'd be no survivors. So you can rule out a miracle of that kind, but the other two kind would be possible. When you get into Hezekiah's shift of the shadow in his sundial, that also rules out the local atmospheric effect. Even though it's a much shorter period, not talking 24 hours now, only 40 minutes. But we see recorded in the book of Isaiah that the miracle was witnessed not just in Jerusalem but also in Babylon. And incidentally, people in those days didn't seem to have a problem with miracles like they do today. The Babylonians saw the event and they said the God of the Hebrews must be doing something. So they sent a delegation from Babylon to Jerusalem to inquire of the priests in Jerusalem as to what kind of miracle their God was performing. But because that's recorded, we realize it's an event that was seen over at least a 600-mile wide extent. And therefore, a local atmospheric event is not going to explain that phenomenon. Yes?
In light of your example of Lot being the only man in the city that could partake in homosexual rape, would you say that man pre-resurrection took place in more evil than we do now in the post-resurrection?
Okay, did post-resurrection man partake of less evil than pre-resurrection man? That's your question?
Yeah, did pre-resurrection man partake in
more evil? The degree of evil, probably not. The extent of evil, definitely yes. So what this permanent indwelling of the Holy Spirit in the lives of several human beings today does is it acts as a restraint on the extent of that kind of expression of evil. But yeah, we have people that engage in homosexual rape today. It's not unique to the Old Testament period. but the extent is unique. We don't have whole cities where that's going on. Any more comments or questions? Yes.